A big topic that is going to give you a lot of strength and a lot of balance in life is the forest. Right now, I'm in the forest. I like spending all of my spare time in the forest, even shooting my videos in the forest. Why? Because the forest gives a very particular kind of energy that is necessary for our mental and physical health. So I'm going to present to you two different studies in this coming video. First, the Japanese doctor and how they discovered that spending time in the forest not only reduces drastically your risk of cancer, but also drastically reduces your everyday stress. And then we're going to talk about ancient Ayurvedic principles of trees and how we can get energy from the trees for our daily life. The secret power of nature. We can all agree nature is an amazing phenomenon, isn't it? Just look at this picture. Such a beautiful place. It gives a sense of well-being, of happiness to see the sun and to see beautiful nature. So why is that? And why do we feel the need to go into nature? Many of us live in cities, but will often spend a holiday or a weekend going for a hike, going for a walk in the park. And what is it exactly that attracts us to this? I'm going to discuss some very interesting findings from Japanese doctors as well as the ancient Ayurvedic text. So the first principle is very interesting, and it is that the immune system is based on your level of happiness. And nature, especially the sun and the forest, give that happiness. I want to tell you now a story about Dr. King Lee. Doctor lives in Japan, and he was commissioned by the Japanese government. He's a medical doctor, and he was commissioned to study the effects of the forest on stress. I first ran across him while watching some interesting videos on YouTube, and I immediately got in contact with him, and he was a very kind-hearted person, and he sent me his complete presentation, which I'm going to share a little bit of that with you here and explain it step by step. He is really the expert on this and has been studying it for many, many years. So here he is here with his research team at the medical school, and they actually did scientific medical research on the effects of forest and the nature has on people. Down here in the bottom you see at the World Conference for Forest for Public Health. He was one of the main speakers there, and he's published amazing books. The power of the forest, the medicine of the forest, he calls it. In Japanese, it's called Shinrin Yoku, which means forest bathing, because when you go into a forest, you are surrounded on all sides by the forest, just like you are when you go into the water for a bath. So he studied the effect of forest bathing on the human immune function and the preventative effect of being in the forest on cancer. And this relates to the situation of workers with strong anxiety and stress in Japan. And here's a graph which shows the number of workers with strong anxiety or stress from 1982 on the left up to 2012 on the right. And as you can see, it's between 50 and 60%. That means 1 out of 2 of every workers, especially the city workers in Japan, are suffering strong anxiety and stress, which, as we know, strong anxiety and stress bring about cancer and disease. So they discovered, or maybe they didn't discover, but there is something called the natural killer cells, the NK cells. And these start with the blood cells, and red blood cells, white blood cells, and the platelets. So they merge into that. and go further, and eventually we get to something called the NK cells. Now, I'm no doctor or medical doctor, so I'm repeating what he says here, but these NK cells, or natural killer cells, these are our immune cells. And they found the relationship between incident rates of cancer and NK activity, that people with a low NK activity show a higher rate of cancer, whereas people with higher NK activity show a lower incidence rate of cancer, as you can see in this very scientific looking graph. So they decided to do an experiment, a forest bathing experiment. They got a group of people together and they took a sample of their blood before going to the forest and after going to the forest, and for some follow-up days. And they also had a control experiment, the same thing with an urban group. So they wanted to go out for a day on a tour. One group went to the forest for a day and one group went walking around the city. So what happened? They found out that forest bathing significantly enhances the human NK activity. So they had the percentage of NK activity before going was, as you see in this graph, around 18%, it looks like. The day after, it had risen up to, 21%, and as you can see on day 2, it rose even further, even though they went only one day in the forest. Compare that to the people walking around the city. The day after, it actually lowered, because walking through a city is rather stressful. You have traffic, noise, different things. And day 2, it was back to normal. And then they also measured the heart rate. The heart rate is a basic index of activity of the autonomic nervous system. And this decrease in heart rate indicates a state of relaxation in the subjects with a higher activity of parasympathetic nerve and lower activity of sympathetic nerve. This basically means the green line is when they were in the forest. The heart rate was definitely lower than when they were walking in the city on the same type of leisurely stroll. So the adrenaline is a stress hormone. So this forest bathing, as you see in the graph on the left, lowered the stress hormone, and the city's tourist trip lowered it for a day because they were just walking around easily, but the next day was back up. What's even more interesting to note is that this NK cell activity had an effect that lasted more than 7 days, even up to 30 days. As you see here on day 2, was a very high amount of NK cells, more than before, and even 30 days later, the high amount stayed. Again, showing the number of natural killer cells increase. Now keep in mind, this increase of natural killer cells are what goes after the cancer cells, because the body is constantly increasing or constantly producing cancer cells. Let's say that cells are continuously becoming cancer cells inside of the body, but because of our immune system, we're able to fight those cancer cells. So the moral of the story is, let's go to the forest. So what do we do in the forest? 2 things: movement and static. That's me there, by the way, standing next to a tree, showing how it's done. I'll first talk about movement. When is the best time to go to the forest and move? Before noon is the best time. Best between 6 and 7 a.m. And what should we do there? Is to move, to run actually, and to lightly jog. A light run through the forest is the absolute best therapy for longevity. If you cannot run, start to walk as much as possible and jog very slightly. How long? If you are doing a light jog and running, then start with 15 to 20 minutes per day in a forest or in a park with a forest, anywhere where you can be surrounded completely by trees and nature with a minimum amount of city influence. And the style is light jogging, like on the toes. The body will warm up gradually. It's a very interesting effect. And I want to tell you a story how this had an effect on me. Um, I had a very stressful year, let's say. We had just moved to Switzerland. I had gotten a new job in an office and was working very many hours under, for me, what was not ideal conditions. I was not used to working in such a place and such an environment. So I started to actually get quite depressed. I started to look for an escape, like, oh, maybe I have to change my job or something. I was very dissatisfied, very unhappy. Energy was very low. I would wake up tired, just tired, and just to get to work and get back and again be tired. And then I thought, well, let me start running. In fact, my wife was listening to one Russian Vedic scientist doctor called Dr. Torsunov from Russia. And he'd been studying the Vedas and the Ayurveda for the past 30, 40 years and found out that you need to run every day to have a mental and physical stability. And when you get to a point where life is just overwhelming you and you think, well, maybe I should change this, maybe I should change that. Actually, no, you need to run. So I thought, okay, I'm going to try it. I'm going to go and start running every day. And I went 15, 20 minutes. I would jog lightly up the hill and back down the hill, and then would take hot, cold shower, breakfast, go to work. And really, after 1 week of doing this, I started to be happy. I started to go to work even happy to go there with a bounce in my step, so to say. And since then, I am very much converted to the point that we must move every day and in the forest. These days, I go to the forest a minimum of half an hour to 1 hour every day. And when I don't go, I don't sleep well, I don't have energy the next day, and the stress is just building up. For me, the forest is a way to de-stress so that I'm able to have the mental and physical capacity to reach my projects without burning out. So the second very important type of activity to do in the forest is static. The stationary position of the body gives the energy of water. So there are very many yoga positions where you stand very still or you sit very still in meditation. And this is actually the energy of water, according to Ayurvedic text. And when you combine that with trees, it is very powerful because trees have certain energies flowing through them, which when you stand next to the trees, it goes into your body as well. And there are many scientific proofs and videos that I will back up with later, but I just want to give you an introduction, an overview, and tell you how to do it so that you can go out and experience for yourself. Try these things for yourself. You will see the effect. So how to do it? First, you should know if a tree is thicker than a person, then it relaxes and relieves stress. So you should stand next to the tree with your back against the tree, like you see in this picture, and do it between 5 and 10 minutes per day. 5 to 10 minutes is enough. If the tree is thinner than a person, then it gives strength and invigorates. For example, after operations, people who are very weak need to stand next to young, thinner trees, where the tree is thinner than the body. And there are two different types of trees we have in Europe, at least the deciduous, the leafy trees, and the conifers, like the Christmas trees. And the deciduous trees soothe and relax a person if you cannot sleep, for example. One of the best trees is the oak tree. Beech trees are also good. Would not recommend, I'm forgetting the English word for the birke, the birch trees. They're very light and airy. For some people, it's more disturbing. But oak trees, beech trees, these are good. And conifer trees, they soothe and tone the body. For example, if you have poor digestion, a weak immunity, or a lot of stress, the pine trees and fir trees are excellent. Pine trees are one of the best to stand next to. So having said that, like I said, I encourage you, go to the forest and try these things for yourself. Notice how you feel. Go in the morning time, get some sun. The sun is actually delivering three types of energies. It's giving light, it's giving warmth, and it's giving a third thing which we don't think about very often, but which we all feel, and that is in Sanskrit called Ananda, which basically means bliss, happiness. As you can see, just looking at this picture, I'm sure you feel some sort of happiness and peacefulness. So try for yourself. I look forward to hearing the results and see you in future videos.